There's no political party that has a tinker's damn interest in the public interest. Okay? That's the political parties exist for their betterment, their enrichment. Here's a piece of legislation. Here's a check. Seldom is a piece of legislation advanced in the Ontario legislature that doesn't come with a big chunk of dough.
Bright Light News. Real journalism. Help expose the truth at brightlightnews.com, and enjoy this interview with Randy Hillier. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege and an honor to be here with Randy Hillier, former MP for Ontario. First, I just want to say thanks for joining us, Randy. It's great to see you as always.
It's a pleasure to see you again, Len, and it's a great pleasure to have you up at Scuttlebutt Lodge and up at the camp. And I hope you're enjoying your time here.
Listen, this 1800s rustic place is fantastic. Hope other people get out here, get a chance to enjoy this. Contact Randy and get a night out here or two. It's a fantastic place, so I highly recommend it. But I want to get into this. I want to say, why is Randy such a pivotal person throughout this whole COVID journey? I remember in April 2020, Randy Hillier being the very first politician in the world speaking out against the ludicrousness of the measures. I remember you speaking up in the legislature asking the Ford government, why are we taking elderly people out of hospitals and sticking them into the hotbeds of death, which are the group homes? Why did you turn down the Ontario Medical Association's offer of furloughed family physicians to open up COVID assessment centres at the group homes?
Yeah.
Indeed, I believe the evidence is compelling that public health failed and that their actions and decisions may have amplified this tragedy. I guess that would include the decision to reject the OMA's offer to send family physicians to create assessment centres at LTC homes, and the decision not to utilize our 500 private labs throughout Ontario to expand our testing capacity, or the decision to remove 1,000 hospital patients out of their hospital beds and into long-term care.
Right, you had so many great questions, and I thought, my God, who is this guy who is bringing these brilliant questions that nobody else is asking? Randy, you have been such a stalwart. You've been vilified for having these correct opinions, these conspiracy theories that are all now turning out to be correct. What I want to know is, and I think a lot of people want to know, is the inside scoop on politics now that you're removed. We have this latest episode with Pierre Poilievre. He was a beacon for a lot of people that were unvaccinated in the freedom movement. And now with one of the tweets, they called out Christine Anderson as a vile racist and whatnot. A lot of people said we're abandoning ship. A lot of people said this truly exposes Pierre Poilievre for who he is. You've got a great insight into why this may have transpired.
Well, to answer that, first off, you have to understand the actual mechanics and the design of the political system. And if one was to throw away all their preconceptions and just start afresh, just start from a brand new initial understanding of how our political system, how our political parties, and how our government actually operates, it would be best to view it as two things. First off, political parties should be seen as, the best analogy that I can come up with is that these are crime families. These are organized crime families, much akin to the Mafia, who are engaged in a protection racket, but it's a lawful, legalized, and authorized protection racket. And then understand that how they grow and how they prosper is through the illusion and the magic and the theater of question period, of parliamentary process, of elevating the premiers and the prime ministers into a role that is much more like a movie star role, a lead actor, or something like a godfather to the crime family. If you throw away all your views that we actually live in a representative democracy, because that's not true. And so with Pierre Poilievre, we saw, and he's a good example. He's not the only example, but he is a good and one of the latest examples. As we all know, for 2 years during the pandemic, he was silent as a mouse on the harms, the dangers, the injuries that were happening to the people in our country. He didn't speak out once about the atrocious care in long-term care and the atrocious death numbers in long-term care. He didn't speak out about the harm to our children in not having an education and being mandated to do unnatural things to be in education. The closure of our parks, our trails, our recreation, our sports. Never said a word about that for 2 years until February 2022.
We've got a small fringe group up for that building. A small fringe group with unacceptable views.
He now sees that Aaron O'Toole is on the deathbed as the godfather of the federal PCs, federal conservatives. And Pierre Poilievre sees an opening that he can exploit, that he can mobilize, motivate, and encourage all these people who are demonstrating a resolve for freedom. He can get them to buy memberships into his crime family. And that all he has to do is say, I'm for freedom. And all these people are motivated. And they all come out and they all vote for Pierre Poilievre at the leadership race. And then, as soon as he's leader, as soon as he's the godfather, as soon as he's got the leading role, well, I don't have to speak about that anymore. I don't have to talk about freedom. And I can call Christine Anderson a vile, racist, whatever. And I don't know all about Christine Anderson, but she has spoken very clearly in opposition to the authoritarian measures of Justin Trudeau, and she has spoken very clearly about the importance of freedom and representative democracy. So, but Pierre Poilievre is not the only one. You know, Doug Ford did that. Patrick Brown did that with the social conservatives here in Ontario, where he told these people that I'm going to get rid of sex ed, the sex ed curriculum. Come and join my team. Give me your $10. Vote for me, and I will be your champion. And of course, as soon as they become leaders, they throw the social conservatives away. And, you know, that's the way politics is. That's because they're not important other than to legitimize their position. Right? Once they have the position, those people are unimportant. And then we can go back to racketeering and the protection racket that political leaders like to be engaged in.
Right, so what you're saying is here we're looking at a legalized mafia, if you will, where leaders, to gain power, to gain leadership, will align themselves with a certain group, and especially any sort of activist group, because they're the easiest and most vocal to get attached to, pick up their cause, and then they will be dispensable, expendable, demographics that can be easily tossed to the side once and distanced as soon as they get their use out of them.
Yeah, that's the way. Go back through our history. That's like those people, those highly motivated and and identifiable demographics are really important in a leadership race, but they're unimportant and baggage and a burden in the general election. Okay? Like, social conservatives are baggage and burden in a general election. And all the political operatives, the ones who actually orchestrate and who control the legislative agenda, and who work tirelessly to get their godfather installed, they know that about 90% of all Canadians who go to the polls to vote, so not 90% of Canadians, but the ones who actually go to the vote, they vote strictly along tribal lines. They vote strictly according to whether it's blue or red or orange or green, and nothing is going to alter 90% of the voters. So other than, you can demotivate them. So what they want to do is be as soft as warm caramel during the election. They don't want to say anything untoward. They don't want to say anything controversial. They always want to go for that mush where none of their supporters would be demotivated. Okay, and I'll give you an example of this. Back in 2007, when I was first elected, John Tory, everybody was expecting John Tory to win the 2007 provincial election. McGuinty had clearly lied, broken all his previous election promises about no new taxes, broke his pledge that he signed to the Canadian Taxpayers Federation about no new taxes. He was being vilified for that. And then, so everybody's expecting John Tory and the Conservatives to gain back our power. Our power, not the public's power. And then John Tory comes out with a policy that says we're going to fund religious schools. Right? We're going to fund Muslim schools. We're going to fund Hindu schools. But that was 2007, not long after 9/11. And of course, the Conservative vote in Ontario dropped to about 29%. We dropped to 27 seats. And the reason why John Tory brought in that policy was not because John Tory was a big champion of competition in our public education system. There was corporate interests that were driving to have private schools in the province that were funding the Conservative Party substantially to make sure that they could have new economic opportunities in education. Okay? Bad timing for John, because I agree, we need to have competition in our public education. But he was beholden to others, and he couldn't deliver on that protection racket, so he got the hook.
So what you're essentially saying is that politicians will pander to a specific crowd, get into power, and they act as these godfathers, but there is someone pulling the strings of the godfathers, which are corporate lobbying interests.
Sure.
Would that be right?
Yeah. Yeah, it would probably be best to, the premier or the prime minister is the face of the godfather. Like, they wield some level of influence, but it's really the people around them, the directors, the producers, the screenplay writers, which in the entertainment world that would be. In the political world, these are the lobbyists, the GR firms, the pollsters, the campaign teams, and major interests, corporate interests that are funding all these things. So, like, it's not some coincidence that Doug Ford has a bunch of developers at his daughter's wedding and has a bunch of developers in key positions, and that he's now announced some changes to the Greenbelt area, that now that the Greenbelt had sterilized that land of development value, and he's paying back. This is the payback. You've supported me, you've given me lots of money, and we're going to ensure that land that you're sitting on that has no value right now is worth billions of dollars. Okay? And I mean billions of dollars. This is a high stakes game. We've done the same thing with casino licenses. Patrick Brown got into a lot of hot water over his currying favor with various casinos and offering up casino licenses. And Doug just did this as well with the online casino licenses that he just did. As well as the cannabis licenses. Like, that was a boon. Like, there was, you dangle those carrots out. You want a license to sell cannabis in the province? Well, we've got the power to make that lawful. And we've got the power to give you exclusive rights in certain areas. And that's what they did for the first couple of years. That's worth a lot of money if you can get the exclusive right to sell cannabis in the city of Ottawa or half of the city of Toronto. Don't be surprised that people will pay big money for those things.
So basically the different parties, it's just a political shell game which one you choose, but they all have their different lobbying masters that are pulling the strings. I don't know if you recall, there was a lobbyist in the U.S., the only one that ever went to jail, Jack Abramoff, made $20 million a year as a lobbyist. He had a third of the chiefs of staffs of senators.
I think he was lying. Yeah. It was more than 20 million.
Oh, yeah, probably. Yeah.
That was probably what he claimed on his taxes.
Right. But he said he had a third of the chiefs of staffs of senators in his pocket because they all wanted to work with him after. He's such a successful guy. And whenever he wanted, say, a new native reserves to get a casino, he'd write things in obscure language. This bill would be, Bill 452X-4, would give it to the chief of staff. They would talk to the senator. The senator would never really read what they're writing. Just sign off on it, and there you go.
Yeah.
Goes to jail. Comes back out. Leslie Stahl interviewed him, and she said, but the landscape has changed now, hasn't it? Because you went to jail, and now there are anti-lobbying laws now. He said, well, yes. We said, before, you could sit down with a politician and give them a cash gift, $25,000. Well, it's changed now. Now, you cannot sit with them, but you can stand up in front of their table and give them a gift, right? And he said that, realistically, the left, the right, they all rub elbows at the same bars in Washington at the end of the day. Is that what we're talking about here as well?
Sure, but it's not like, the corruption in our politics is far more sophisticated than the old days of having a brown paper bag full of cash. That's coarse, that's rude, that's unsophisticated. We do it straight out in the open. And the public is so naive or ignorant or uncaring, generally speaking. Look at what SNC Lavalin, they got caught giving the federal Liberals a few $100,000 to get a deferred prosecution. There's no need to, do things under the table. Mm-hmm. The public is just so uninformed. The media has become numb to scandal and you do it all above board, and oftentimes, nobody would have known about SNC Lavalin, even though it was all documented, it was all above board, had it not been Jody Wilson-Raybould. like nobody would have ever cared. You know, and the odd time in our politics, an individual with integrity appears. Jody Wilson-Raybould in that case, and says, "Oh, that's wrong. That defies God's commandment about lying or bearing false witness, or and they pay the penalty for it, obviously. But you know, like we have so much information, so much knowledge, so much legislation. You know, here in Ontario we have about 500,000 laws. Federally, we have about the same, about 500,000 laws. We can bury anything and everything. You know, we have a budget bill that comes through that's 400 pages. You know, who's going to read that?
Yeah.
You know, you are buried with knowledge. You know, it would be like saying, you know, you take a look at the forests around here. Can you identify a single tree in there? Can you ever even see a dead or decaying or rotten tree when you're looking at a million trees? It can be done, but it takes effort, and it requires people to read, and it requires people to take the time. In most, I've, you know, and I'm sure there's others, you know, I just haven't come across them, Glenn, who actually ever read a piece of legislation. You know, they would be quite happy that they get their talking point from the party. The party would develop a summary of each piece of legislation, and they would hand it to you and say, there you go, Glenn, that's what you need to know, this one-page summary. Not too many words, like maybe 400 words was about the maximum that any one legislator could consume and understand and digest. There you go. And here's your key messages, you know, 3 or 4 key messages, and that's all you need to know.
Yeah, I mean, we saw that during COVID with Dr. David Williams, the former chief medical officer of health, when he was caught in that hot mic moment.
Yeah.
Where he said, I don't know, I just read whatever they tell me to read. There's a script.
There's a script.
So who's writing?
Just like the leading actors. Here's your script.
Yeah.
Memorize it, understand it, deliver it well. Deliver it well. Convince the audience that what you're saying is what you actually believe.
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess one of the greatest actors that we'd have to say in one of the most powerful positions, if not the most powerful position in the world, would have to be President Joe Biden when he speaks gobbledygook and doesn't make any sort of sense.
The case where we cannot let this, we've never allowed any crisis from the Civil War straight through to the pandemic of 17, all the way around 16. We have never let our democracy take second fiddle. We can both have a democracy and elections and at the same time correct the public health.
I mean, it's incredible. We got a chance to interview former MP Rick Nichols.
Yeah.
And he told us that when he had his vaccination status doxed by someone within the PC party, that he received a phone call. He had a deadline to either get vaccinated or not. And he said he received a phone call and it said, listen, get the shot or you're done. It wasn't Doug.
No.
And the name that he mentioned, he said, follow the money. He said, it's Corey Tenike.
Yeah.
These are the people who are running things in Ontario, or, you know, can you talk more about...
There's a Corey Tenike in every province.
Right.
And it's not just a Corey Tenike. There's, you know, in my time in the PC caucus, it was Corey Tenike, it was Chris Froggett. So Corey owned Rubicon Strategies. You know, nice name. Like, what does Rubicon Strategies mean? You know, across some river.
It's a lobbying firm, though, correct?
It's a lobbying firm.
Yeah.
Chris Froggett owned Loyalist Public Affairs. And their buddy was chief of staff with Doug Ford, Dean French. Now, of course, Dean French got caught with his pants down and had to resign in disgrace after they found out that he was dispensing patronage appointments to young lacrosse players and sister-in-laws and brother-in-laws and cousins and, you know, second cousins and who were none of who were qualified to do anything other than play lacrosse. He got found out. But here's something that people need to understand. As corrupt as what you and I may think is corrupt, where lobbyists are advancing the agenda, sitting in cabinet meetings, restricting access to the Premier, only permitting the Premier to hear certain things, and you know, they can say, Doug, you can sit by the pool and relax. We've got everything under control here. You know, you go back and relax. Take a flight down and watch the Miami Dolphins if you like. Spend some time at your Florida home. We've got everything under control, and we'll tell you what needs to be done. Okay? We'll tell you what contracts you should sign with Pfizer. We'll tell you what contracts should be signed to build a new hospital. We'll tell you what lands should be given to the developers for the and outside of the Greenbelt. We'll handle everything for you, and if anybody does cause a stink, well, we'll have the messaging for you so that you know what to say. You rest your head easy on the pillow, collect your money, and people like Doug are, well, that's an okay lifestyle, you know, as long as he, so Corey, Chris, Nick Kuvalis is another one. You know, he gets a couple $1 million a year from the party to do polling and focus groups, and he's the one who comes back and says to Doug and Corey, you know, this is where the people are. This is where the people are. This is where you need to position yourself, Doug. If you want to remain the Godfather, this is where you need to be, and this is the language that you have to use. And they have the PR firms as well in there to make sure that the language is appropriate to keep the protection racket going.
It sounds so lecherous how the public is being used to empower people to push other people's agendas at the expense of the very people they're supposed to and are paid for to represent. Is democracy illusion? How long has it been an illusion for?
Well, listen, there's no political party that has a tinker's damn interest in the public interest. Okay? That's, the political parties exist for their betterment, their enrichment. How long has this been going on for? I don't know. It's been going on as long as I was in politics. You know, and it takes, you know, and it takes a few years of careful observation to connect the dots, to see the dots, and then to connect them up. You know, like this stuff is camouflaged nicely. You know, the theater and the illusion is not just for the public. It's also for the actors and the extras. Like, there's a lot of people in politics who have no idea what's going on. But I'll say one example. I'm not going to use the words because I bet you should vet this with the lawyer before I say it. Because I don't actually have any statement because it was a verbal conversation. I had a group of people come in to see me when I was a critic for labor. And they said, Randy, we want you to advance this piece of legislation that would create a new regulatory body. Okay? And I talked to them, I looked at them, and I said, why would we ever want to have a professional college, a professional regulatory body for clerks? And I'll just use the word clerks. And they said, well, these clerks are important, and we don't want to have just any old clerk hanging their shingle up. And I talked to them, and I said, well, I'm not going to do that. And I got a call from the chief of staff's office, and she said, Randy, you really pissed these people off. And they were going to give the party $50,000 if you put that legislation forward. Right? And I said, well, I'm not going to do it. And of course, it's unlawful. It is unlawful to bribe or exchange money to advance legislation. That's on the books. It's part of our... Anyway, I wouldn't do it. They did go to Christine Elliott, and Christine Elliott did advance the legislation. So, the party got their money. I don't know what else happened. I wouldn't do it. But I can't begin to tell you how many different times groups came to me, industry groups, business groups, people that were apparently representing their members, who said, here's a piece of legislation, here's a check. Right? And I would say to you and your audience, Glenn, that seldom is a piece of legislation advanced in the Ontario legislature that doesn't come with a big chunk of dough.
It would seem then that anything that's advanced, again, is to the detriment of the people. And you'd mentioned Christine Elliott.
Yeah.
Is there any way that there is some sort of connection? You had talked before about protected racketeering.
Yeah, each one has their turf.
Right.
If you look at the ministries as more as of a turf, like if you in the Mafia world, you may have one family that controls the casinos, and another family that controls the waterfront and the Teamsters, and another family that controls whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's how you should look at the ministries.
Right.
Okay? And there's some ministries that are far more lucrative in the protection business than others. So, health is a really good racket. Hospitals, labs, surgeons, there's a lot of, pharmaceuticals, which drugs are going to be listed, which ones are OHIP going to pay for, which procedures. That's a good protection racket. Transportation is another really good protection racket. Who's going to get the contracts to pave the 401? Who's going to get the contracts to build the interchanges? That's a good racket. Culture and tourism and immigration, well, you can't extort too much money there. So labor is a good one. You can squeeze the unions a fair bit. You can squeeze the contractors a fair bit. So that's the way you should look at how the system is constructed, or how it works now anyway.
So do we look at people who are unqualified to fit ministerial positions, like Christine Elliott as the Minister of Health, as a lawyer, looking at Patty Haydu, who was the Minister of Health on the federal level, who said that vitamin D helping respiratory diseases is fake news. Yeah. I mean, the severe lack of qualifications and just the ignorance of the science and the data. I mean, how do these people fall into these positions?
Well, it's not a matter of competency or knowledge. It's a lack of integrity. It's a lack of a moral foundation. Godfather doesn't have to be smart about public health. You need to know how to extract the money. You need to know how to keep the public satisfied, appeased, accepting. There's a wait list. Yeah, well, we're going to spend another $10 million over here to help on this wait list, and we're going to have a wait list strategy. you come out with the colorful language and the verbiage that means nothing but sounds like it could be anything. But it shows that, you're taking their concerns at heart. Our system is absent of integrity.
Right.
There's not a person in the executive branch of any of our governments who believes that the commandment of thou shalt not bear false witness is important. Bear false witness, if we can make some money on it, it's a good way to make money if we bear false witness.
Well, it's amazing when I reflect back on one of the stories that we talked about. During COVID, Ontario, in the beginning, in May 2020, had, I believe, around 3,000 ICU beds.
Yeah.
Fast forward a year, 2 years later, there was a net drop of 1,000 ICU beds during a supposed pandemic. Yeah. How does that happen? So we put out this story. A week later, we get an email, and somebody says, we went to go check that link that you sent for the information from Public Health Ontario. And I went back and checked it, and lo and behold, they dropped the May 2020 ICU beds by about 1,200 to show a net increase of 200 beds over the pandemic. So it's incredible, this theater that you talk about, that if you have eyes to see, it's so easy to see.
Oh, right? Yeah, but we're inundated with data. We're inundated with information that, you can't see who the rotten tree is there. So in the first year of COVID, our hospital utilization rate went from 110%. Okay, because that had been our baseline. All our hospitals were over capacity for decades. And we coined a phrase, hallway healthcare, to indicate to the public that expect to wait for healthcare, right? Summer of 2020, our hospital utilization rate drops to 62%. Right? Our hospitals were empty. We're in the height of a global apocalyptic pandemic. Apparently, people are dying like flies everywhere, right? And our hospitals are half empty. Half empty. The nurses are doing TikTok dance videos. The doctors are choreographing the TikTok dance videos. And still the public could not see. The public could not see the fact that was in front of their face, even when somebody went, wake up.
Yeah.
Right? So, shall we blame government? Yeah, you can point your fingers at government. But if you point your finger at government and not recognize the public bot, P.T. Barnum said, there's a sucker born every minute. Politicians and political parties know this. If you don't want to be a sucker, if you don't want to be duped, be awake. Otherwise, the political parties are the P.T. Barnum. They'll sell you something. They'll put a new puppy in the window. They'll put a new freak show on display for you, whether it's a Chinese balloon or a UFO, an alien. One day, they'll easily distract you if you're going to sit in front of a TV and not inform yourself of anything else.
Right, and for anybody who's pointing out the political theater, the harmful policies that they're implementing, like yourself, being an ethical person, you will be vilified, you will be coined far-right conspiracy theorist. I mean, it's so cliche now that anything is racist now, when that's the way they just dismiss anything.
Well, here, Elon Musk provides documentary evidence of emails and correspondence of Twitter, Facebook, Google, YouTube, all being enmeshed with law enforcement and military intelligence in the removal of people who were speaking in a dissenting fashion over the COVID. Okay? This was not the communist Chinese who were suppressing us. This was not evil Putin who was suppressing the information. It was our own law enforcement and military intelligence agencies were purposely, willfully obstructing and removing factual information from the marketplace. Okay? You know, and that's something I think people need to dwell on. Like, you know, when I was a young guy, I always knew who the good guys and the bad guys were. Okay? Like, it was easy. A lot of people don't want to recognize who the good guys and the bad guys are today. Like, it used to be, when I was a youngster, that it was the communists who suppressed information, who censored information. It was the USSR and the CC, Communist Chinese Party, who were suppressing information. And now we're doing it. So who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys here? Ask the question. Ask the question of yourself. Is that what a honest, truthful, forthright, transparent, accountable government does? Have our state actors and institutions vilify people, remove their platforms, make sure that they can't say anything?
It's a great point, and what we're seeing is that the propaganda, the gaslighting of the public has been so masterful that not even people reading the UK Health Minister, Mr. Matt Hancock's, WhatsApp message saying, when do we deploy the next variant? Right?
And how can we make it the most fearful?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
not just when do we deploy this variant, how do we deploy it in the most lethal fashion that we can?
Yeah.
Okay? How can we generate the greatest fear?
Yeah. So there's an admitted fear campaign, and these aren't the first leaks. There was a Laura Dodson, she wrote about the state of fear, how SAGE, which is, I believe, the vaccine arm over in the UK, employed psychiatrists to manipulate the UK public into having more fear so they become more compliant of the measures, because there wasn't enough compliance, literally what they said. So in terms of this, how, with such a great propaganda machine at play here, how do we move forward so that we can restore ethics and democracy when ethical people like you are being railroaded out?
So listen, it's not that difficult to live truthfully, honestly, and freely. It really isn't. It may appear to be an oversized monster or demon, okay? But let's get things in play here. Let's get things in a relative fashion. Like, sure, I've been vilified, and sure, I've been called all kinds of names and whatnot. Am I still here? Do I still have my health? Do I still speak out? Sure. Okay. Can I walk down the streets of any community with my head held high? Yeah, I do. I don't have to, live freely. Just and speak honestly. I don't know if this is, one of the things. Put your cell phone down. I'm a big believer in that. If you've got something to say electronically on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, don't do it from the phone. Sit down at a computer and actually take the time to think before you do it. Like the phone compels you. There's a compulsive element with it that makes you respond right now before you even had a time to think.
Right. They programmed an addictive quality to it, like jackpot machines.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I would say to everybody, use your cell phone as a phone. Throw away the apps and all the and same with emails. Sit down and think before you compose an email. But better still, pick up the phone and actually talk to somebody, right? And go out and just, like I've never worn. I have to be cautious here because of all my prohibitions on what I'm allowed to say with the courts and whatnot. But I've never covered my face, ever, right? I come from a time when it was the bad guys that covered their face, okay? And I'm not going to cover my face. I come from a time when I decide what I'm going to put in my body. And nobody's ever going to tell me what I am going to put in or not put in. And nobody's going to tell me how many people are allowed in my house or who can be at my house or when they can be at my house. This is my house. And until the government actually buys my house, that's when they can decide how many people can be here, right? I think people just need to realize that you cannot be harmed by living freely. You cannot be harmed by speaking honestly. You just can't be hurt by being honest. And if there's dickheads out there calling names, well, who cares? Who cares?
Well, listen, you remind me, Rocco Galati spoke the other night at a function, and he said, your level of fear, the higher your fear, the higher the level of tyranny that you allow into our society.
Yeah.
So, great words.
It's, you saw my chicken coop out there. They live in a little coop. They're fearful of everything around, right? They never leave. They never go too far from the coop. They never go too far from the rooster. The world's a big, dangerous place if you've got a brain the size of a chicken, right? But our brains are a little bit bigger than that.
Wise words, well said.
It's, don't be fearful.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the way out. It's self-empowerment, taking charge of your life again, getting back in touch with the things that are real and not getting caught up in these devices and the political theater that's out there, the COVID theater that's out there. And
learn.
Yeah.
Learn. Learn what actually is happening.
Yeah.
There is nothing greater that can overcome fear other than knowledge. Okay? The first time I spoke out against the COVID measures was March 26th. So on March 17th, I sent Doug Ford and all of Cabinet a letter saying, I don't know what this is all about. I said, I'm worried that you've taken authorities now that may not be so easy to give up. I said, I'm hopeful that you will use this arbitrary authority with integrity, but know it within yourselves that there will be a great temptation to continue with it. And that letter is part of my constitutional challenge. It's on the public record. It's on my website. That was the night of March 17th. And I took a few days. And, the first time I publicly spoke out against the COVID measures was March 26th. And I said, and I stood up in the legislature and I said, all these people have called me. They're not getting medical attention. They're full of anxiety and stress and worry, and uncertainty and doubt whether or not they're going to be able to keep their jobs, whether they're going to be able to keep their homes, whether they're going to be able to provide for their children, whether they'll keep their businesses. And we're worrying people sick as well as actually making them sick. And preventing people from getting adequate and proper health care services. So on March 26th, I didn't say anything about COVID. I said, the state of emergency has to be over. We now have to allow legislators back into the House and convey to the public the harm that we're doing to people and I said, we need to end the state of emergency. We need to find a better way of dealing with this, whatever this is. And it wasn't until another week or two later when it was after the Diamond Princess docked, that famous cruise ship that had been under quarantine.
Right.
When it docked, and then we found out, well, okay, there's the perfect laboratory experiment. A floating petri dish that had no other external variables involved. And after it disembarked, we knew that we were dealing with the flu. The flu and a pandemic of fear.
Common sense, salt of the earth, pragmatism, and humanity. That's all I've ever gotten from you, Randy. And you've been a true maverick and voice in the wind of chaos in this COVID narrative. So I want to end this interview by saying thank you for everything you've done. Wish you continued success. And how do people get out here to Scuttlebutt Lodge and enjoy a drink with you?
Well, some people, the old-fashioned people can look me up in the phone book if you still know what a phone book is. I've never had an unlisted phone number, Glenn. But if you're a little bit more tech savvy, you can go to nomorlockdowns.ca. There's an icon on there for Scuttlebutt Lodge, and you can click on it, see the pictures. You can book it online. And but I will also say, I still have my provincial charges. I still have my constitutional challenges. I still have a great burden of expenses and a very vindictive and vengeful crown in Ottawa that so I still have a bunch of legal challenges.
Right, yeah. How much are you looking at in terms of fines right now and charges?
Well, right now I'm down to about 1.2 million in maximum fines, and the Crown in Ottawa is looking for a minimum of 3 years of incarceration for my actions in Ottawa. But they're just being brutal in their obstruction and their obtuse behavior. So the legal bill, I'm pretty confident saying this, the Crown in Ottawa would rather see me bankrupt than see me in jail. They'd rather see me shut up and quiet because they have destroyed me financially. That's what their preference is.
Well, this has been a war of attrition.
Yeah.
Right? So for anybody speaking out, whether it be doctors, scientists, elected officials.
We're all and I know there's a great many people who are facing a great many burdens.
Yeah, activists.
And that was evident to me on March 26, 2020. And the number of people that have been hurt and harmed and continue to be has not gotten any less. It's gotten
worse.
Worse.
Yeah, catastrophically.
Yeah.
Well, listen, folks, If you can, also please donate, help out Randy. The guy has worked tirelessly for all of our freedoms and our rights, and you will find no greater champion in this gentleman than I've had the great pleasure to now call my friend. So, Randy.
Thank you very much, Glenn.
Thank you again for having me.
It's been a pleasure having you up. I hope you enjoyed a good dinner up at in Lanark and some good conversation. And we'll look forward to having you and so many other great people that have come up to the lodge. And you know that this is a place where you can live freely and take a few days off from the madness of the world.
Right on. 100%.
Please support real journalism. Donate today at brightlightnews.com or send an e-transfer to gord@brightlightnews.com.